Hello and welcome back to Deck Tech Tuesday. My name is Owen and today we are going over a green-white humans deck that takes advantage of the card Lone Rider and does have a little bit of Delirium in it, but without further ado, let's get started. So, as it kind of says in the name, Lone Rider is the main card in the deck and it is a card I've been waiting to build around since Eldritch Moon came out. Now this is a 1/1 with First Strike and Lifelink, and as when you flip it, it is a 4/4 with First Strike, Lifelink, and Trample. It is insanely overpowered when you can flip it on turn 3, which happens incredibly a lot in this deck. It is very consistent flipping on turn 3, and if it doesn't flip on turn 3, or if you just don't have it, then it's pretty easy to flip later on in the game as well with all the buffs and enchantments we are running, and a lot of our creatures buff other creatures, which is nice. The next kind of fun creature I guess we're running are 3 copies of Obsessive Skinner. Now this is the only reason we need Delirium in the deck, and it is, just to put it like, very good. I've always wanted to build around this card as well, and I've never kind of gotten the time to do it, and I've never really had a good deck, but I think it kind of fits in this deck very well. Being able to buff up a Lone Rider, and if you have Delirium, you can buff it up again, making it a 3/3 on your opponent's upkeep, and they might not see that, they might skip over that, like waste removal on something else, and then bam, you have a flipped Lone Rider if it blocks or attacks on the next turn. The next creature we are running, 3 copies of Thalia's Lieutenant. Now, nothing, I guess, like wow about this card. It's been a all-star in every humans deck basically ever created, in Standard of course, and it is just a good card. We aren't running a 4 of because late in the game, if it shows up, it's horrible, just being a 1/1 and buffing up maybe nothing, and we aren't going as wide as some humans decks, so it's not as important to give a counter to everything if we only have like 1 or 2 other creatures out. The next creature running 2 copies of Thraben Inspector, another all-star in humans decks, being a 1-mana 1/2, and that's kind of nice, I guess, but it's really in the deck as being a threat or a potential threat and giving us card advantage. The next creature, 2 copies of Duskwatch Recruiter. Now, a good 2-mana werewolf, I guess, and when it flips, it can be a pretty good threat, but as much as it is to cost less on your creatures, I actually really like the other side, where you can spend 3 mana, 2 and a green to look at the top 3 cards and put a creature in your hand, and I believe that is very good because our deck, when it goes later into the game, we have a hard time winning and drawing cards, or getting winners, finishers, I guess, and this really does help. Our next creature, 2 copies of Lambholt Pacifist. It can easily be a 4/4, so you don't have to worry about it flipping it for it to be able to attack, and it is a good blocker on turn 2, but I mean, that's not what it's going to be used for. This is an aggro deck. It's a great attacker, but if you have like the option of playing this or Lone Rider on turn 2, sometimes you might be playing this on turn 2. Our next 2 creatures, and our last 2 creatures, are 1 copy of Tireless Tracker and 1 copy of Hamlet Captain. Now, I said these at the same time because I believe they serve a similar purpose, actually. The Hamlet Captain, buffing up other humans, it's a good budget option. You could take it out, put another Tireless Tracker, or take out a Tireless Tracker and put another one of these. But I guess the Hamlet Captain kind of also replaced the other Thalia's Lieutenant because it is a bigger creature and it can buff up other humans more reliably. But yeah, if you don't want to play this, then I guess you could just play another Thalia's Lieutenant or another Tireless Tracker or another Thraben Inspector even. On to the 8 enchantments we are running. 3 copies of Vessel of Nascency. Now this is 3 of our 5 things to get Delirium in our deck other than just naturally happening. And it is good card advantage. I like playing this on turn 1 over a Thraben Inspector usually. But unless you're planning, usually I would use like its ability, not on turn 2 unless necessary, but usually turn 4 or 5 maybe. But turn 3 is also an okay time to do it if you're trying to get Delirium for Obsessive Skinner, and it's just a good card to get card advantage with. Next, we're running 2 copies of Griff's Boon. Now this is a good resiliency piece because most enchantment auras you can't get back from a graveyard, and that's nice. But it's insane to add this to a flipped Lone Rider, or like pre-flipped I guess, making it a 5/4 flying, trample, lifelink, first strike. I'd remember all those abilities, and let's just say that usually can win you the game. Our next enchantment, and our last one, 3 copies of Always Watching. Now this has shown up in almost every humans deck, I think. Probably maybe not 1 or 2, but you know, who cares. Anyways, this is great for buffing up Lone Riders or Thaller's Lieutenants, Obsessive Skinners, things that normally are going to be small-ass creatures, but with this, they can be amazing. And it's just kind of a win condition if you can put it out there with a Griff Spoon that's attached to a Lone Rider, and let's just say how insane that is. A 2-mana creature with 5 great offensive abilities. Onto the instants, 3 copies, or 2 copies, of Grapple with the Past. Now this is a very good Delirium operator, I guess, and it is nice to have later in the game getting back, let's say, a Lone Rider from your graveyard to your hand, or it can be a way to get lands. Let's say you need a 3rd land for maybe an Always Watching, and it's just a good card for resiliency. Next, 2 copies of Clear Shot. Now this is a buff spell that can also take out a creature. Now it is important to remember if you do this to a Lone Rider, it will not cause its lifelink to happen, it won't gain you the life to flip it, because it's not fighting the creature, it is simply dealing damage equal to its power to target creature. But it's also used as a buff spell, and that's kind of nice, and it's one of our ways of removal. Our next instant, 3 copies of Aim High. Now this was a 4-of to begin with, and it is pretty nice. Let's say they have a creature out and you do, and you attack with a 1/1 Lone Rider. Well then they just take one, maybe block it, expecting you have a pump spell, but if it's game 1 they usually will just let it through. Well then they can attack with their 2/2 or 1/2 or 2/1 or whatever, and then you can aim high, untap the Lone Rider, block it. It's a 3/3, lifelink happens, and bam, your Lone Rider flips on their end step, and that's a very big swing. So this card is it's shown to be pretty good. That's what I meant to say. On to the sorceries. We're only running 3 of them, and they're all, sorry about this, Declaration in Stone. Now, the happy thing is, I do have a very similar replacement, and that is 3 copies of Stasis Snare. They pretty much do the same thing. I'm just running Declaration in Stone because it's better to have a sorcery, and it's the only sorcery in the deck. As for, we already have 8 enchantments, I believe, and it's nice to have this. It's good to kill later game creatures, and sometimes our deck can't even get to 3 mana, and it's not necessary to get to 3 mana, but it's just nice to have this kind of as a backup. And lastly in the deck, 2 copies of Terrarion. Now this is our only 2 artifacts in the deck, which are good to have for the Obsessive Skinner. It can fix our mana. Let's say we only have forests out and we have an Always Watching in our hand. Well, turn 3 you can sacrifice this, draw a card. That's also nice. But it's just a way to fix mana. It's another turn 1 play. I guess instead of this you could play just a 1-mana 2/1 creature, or maybe some Marthraben Inspectors or anything, but I like this in the deck because of its being an artifact, but yeah, it's pretty nice. On to the mana that every deck needs: 8 forests, 8 plains, 1 Canopy Vista, 1 Fortified Village, and 4 Evolving Wilds. Thank you so much for watching this week's edition of Deck Tech Tuesday. I hope you like our first budget deck. I do believe it is pretty powerful, and it's definitely a very fun deck to play with. There's a lot of upgrades you can make to it. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.